It looked like the WNBA saga, the little run that they had, is now over, as major networks could be pulling segments from the broadcast, and this current CBA agreement is heating up. This is all what the owners want.
Okay, this is wild. The WNBA has just been hit with a bombshell that could genuinely shake the entire league to its core. ESPN and Fox Sports, two of the biggest names in sports, are reportedly pulling back their coverage. And the timing, honestly, it couldn't be worse.
Think about ESPN, Fox, other sports networks. Everybody has took away WNBA segments.
You see, Caitlin Clark, the very player who brought the league its biggest rating spike in decades, is sidelined. And just like that, the spotlight has dimmed almost overnight. What was once hyped as this incredible rising era for women's basketball now looks like it's collapsing under its own weight. Fans who specifically tuned in for Clark's electric play, well, they've tuned out, leaving these massive networks questioning if the whole hype was ever even sustainable.
The ratings go down. What happened when the ratings go down? They're back in a sunken place, bro. And guess what happens when they go back in a sunken place? They're not getting no big-time paydays.
For a league already struggling with everything from pay disputes to falling ticket sales and constant controversy, this latest move feels like a crushing blow. But here's the real question, and it's not just why ESPN and Fox walked away, it's what this truly means for the future of the WNBA itself.
Y'all ain't finna get no $1 million contracts. Guess what's gonna happen to that CBA agreement? It's gonna stay the same. You're not getting no extra money. The ratings has dropped 80%. That's what they're gonna say. You know, they're gonna be looking through this. Hey, you know what? The ratings are just, yeah, I'm sorry. So all of that momentum that you guys had about a year and a half ago, it's over. It's over.
When ESPN and Fox Sports made that quiet but totally calculated decision to reduce their WNBA coverage, trust me, it wasn't just some programming shuffle, it was a statement. These are networks built on ratings, on compelling storylines that attract advertisers and keep you, the viewer, locked in. For the past year, Caitlin Clark was that storyline. Every highlight reel, every press conference, every single record-breaking performance, she had brought eyes to a league that for decades had genuinely struggled to capture any mainstream attention.
I'll say a little conspiracy with keeping Caitlin Clark out, with them playing a factor in her not being there to keep the CBA agreements and pull away the interest from the league. I believe this is a planned attack by the WNBA owners, commissioners, to pull the interest away from the league.
But here's the kicker: the moment she went down with an injury, that momentum just disappeared. And those networks immediately started to reassess whether that investment was even worth it anymore. The harsh reality, my friends, is this: networks don't operate on loyalty, they operate on numbers. When Clark was on the court, ratings surged, merchandise moved like crazy, and social media was buzzing. Without her, those metrics absolutely cratered. The so-called Clark effect proved real. Maybe even too real, because instead of lifting the league as a whole, her presence actually exposed just how shockingly dependent the WNBA had become on a single player.
This has been a joke, and the WNBA has, in my view, blown its opportunity.
When she was sidelined, it wasn't just the Indiana Fever who lost out, it was the entire league. Fans noticed immediately. Games that once trended on Twitter barely made a ripple. Primetime slots shrank, highlights vanished from nightly sports shows. ESPN executives saw the cold hard data and knew exactly what it meant. Advertisers weren't going to pay premium prices to run ads during games that people weren't watching. Fox Sports, known for being even more cutthroat with its programming, reportedly came to the exact same conclusion. Why on earth would they allocate precious airtime to a product that simply can't stand on its own without Clark?
To get these set paydays that they garner and they want, bro. In order to do that, you have to have a consistent track record of good ratings, consistent track records of merchandise sales, ticket sales, and all of these things. And I'm telling you right now, next year is going to be a tough year.
What makes this sting even more is just how public this drop-off has become. Just last season, the whole narrative was that the WNBA had finally arrived. Articles were being written everywhere declaring a golden era, debate sparked about salary increases, and players were demanding respect and paydays to actually match the NBA. But all of that noise, it's been absolutely silenced by one injury. It's not fair to Clark, nor is it fair to the athletes who worked hard for decades before her, but the networks have definitively spoken with their actions. No Clark, no coverage. Inside the league, frustration has reportedly turned into outright anger. Players who desperately wanted to prove the game was bigger than one star are now realizing just how fragile the system really is. Owners and executives can spin it however they like, but when the two biggest networks in sports essentially pull the plug, it sends a clear message that the hype train has completely derailed. For a league fighting tooth and nail to renegotiate its CBA, trying to leverage popularity into higher salaries, this timing honestly couldn't be worse.
You watch WNBA games since Caitlin Clark got hurt. Now think about this. It led our show last summer.
A bunch.
Oh, I think I led with it 6 times. I led with the WNBA. And either way, I talk about what I think is interesting. You notice I didn't talk about it this year?
Yeah.
It's not because I suddenly disliked the league. I thought it was growing. Anybody that wants to argue this, you're off your rocker. Caitlin Clark.
You see, to them, Clark is the league. And yet the most telling part of this whole story isn't just that ESPN and Fox walked away, it's how quickly they did it, without hesitation, almost as if they were waiting for an excuse. But hold up, because the fallout doesn't end there. Because these networks stepping back has now opened the door for critics to tear into the league even harder.
I don't know what the ratings are. I haven't read them, but I know last year with Caitlin Clark, I would, if the game was on, I would drive home making a point. Hey, when's that game on?
I would watch it on my phone.
Yes.
The retreat of ESPN and Fox Sports didn't just happen in a vacuum, you know? It was the inevitable result of a storm that had been building for months, and Caitlin Clark's injury was simply the spark that lit the fuse. To truly understand why these media giants stepped away so quickly, you have to look at the numbers. The WNBA was riding an unprecedented wave when Clark entered the league. Her college stardom translated directly into professional buzz, ratings doubled, arenas filled, and merchandise sold out. For the first time in decades, mainstream outlets were prioritizing WNBA coverage in their highlight reels. But the network soon realized something really troubling. The numbers weren't spread across the board, they were tied almost exclusively to Clark's appearances. When she got hurt, the data absolutely collapsed overnight. National broadcasts that had pulled respectable numbers plummeted to near record lows, local ticket sales stagnated, and storylines that once trended on social media just disappeared from the conversation. For ESPN and Fox, this wasn't just a disappointment, it was a liability. Networks thrive on momentum, and the WNBA's momentum was tied to a single thread. Once that thread snapped, the product stopped making financial sense. Advertisers who had bet big on Clark's rookie season were suddenly pulling back, unwilling to spend top dollar on games that couldn't deliver viewership. And that's where the controversy deepens. The networks didn't just cut back quietly, they slashed segments with ruthless precision. Pre-game coverage vanished, highlight packages shrank, and talk show debates that once featured Clark and her rivalries were dropped altogether. Fans noticed the silence, and players felt it even more. For athletes who had fought for years to elevate the league's visibility, it was a brutal reminder that their platform still wasn't strong enough without one superstar carrying the weight. Critics argue that the league itself set up this dynamic. By funneling so much promotion into Clark, the WNBA made her both the savior and the scapegoat. While she boosted the league, she also became its single point of failure. Networks aren't in the business of patience, they're in the business of profit. When profits dipped, they didn't hesitate to move on. Some insiders even believe ESPN and Fox had been looking for an exit strategy all along, citing the WNBA's strained relationship with networks over broadcast rights and scheduling conflicts. Clark's injury just gave them the perfect excuse. For the players, the fallout is devastating. This isn't just about airtime, it's about leverage. Heading into critical CBA negotiations, athletes were hoping to use rising ratings as ammunition for better pay. Without coverage, their bargaining power simply evaporates. And as networks shift focus elsewhere, the players' voices grow quieter. Once networks scale back, it's nearly impossible to get them back. Sports media thrives on momentum, and the WNBA's momentum has hit a wall. But here's the crazy part. This isn't the end of the story, because the owners themselves may have seen this collapse coming and potentially used it to their advantage. Behind all the headlines about networks pulling coverage lies a far deeper issue: the looming battle over the WNBA's collective bargaining agreement. Insiders have been whispering for months that owners were bracing for tough negotiations, and Caitlin Clark's injury may have handed them unexpected leverage. With the current CBA set to expire, players were preparing to push hard for higher salaries, better benefits, and more media exposure. Their argument was simple: with surging ratings and Clark's star power, the league finally had proof of its value. But when ESPN and Fox walked away, that leverage vanished almost instantly. Owners now find themselves in a stronger position than ever. Instead of being pressured to hand out million-dollar contracts, they can point to tanking ratings and dwindling interest as justification to keep salaries low. Some even believe this isn't a coincidence, but a calculated move. The theory goes like this: by allowing the hype around Clark to fade and failing to promote the rest of the league, owners create a crisis that benefits them in negotiations. If the league looks weak, players can't demand big money. It's a cynical but familiar playbook in professional sports: shrink the pie before deciding how to split it. Fans have already noticed signs of this strategy. Coverage of rivalries outside of Clark's orbit has been minimal, and marketing campaigns seem to dry up almost as soon as her injury was confirmed. Even the Indiana Fever, Clark's own team, has been accused by critics of not doing enough to protect or promote her. Conspiracy theories began to swirl. Did the Fever and league executives quietly agree that sidelining Clark would help temper expectations heading into CBA talks? While that claim might sound extreme, the timing definitely raises eyebrows. What's undeniable is the pressure this creates on the players themselves. For years, WNBA athletes have campaigned for respect and equal treatment, but the lack of consistent fan engagement has been their Achilles heel. Owners know this, and with networks retreating, the argument for pay increases looks weaker than ever. Instead of walking into negotiations with momentum, players are now scrambling to defend their value. That's not the position they envisioned when Clark's arrival electrified the league just a season ago. The lockout threat makes this even more volatile. If no agreement is reached by October, the 2026 season could be in jeopardy. That's not just a setback. It could be catastrophic for a league already fighting for survival. For fans, the idea of losing games after years of struggling to build relevance is unthinkable. For owners, however, it might be part of the plan. Push players into a corner until they accept terms that favor management. And yet, as bleak as this sounds, the controversy doesn't stop with the boardroom, because while the owners might see an opportunity, the players are watching their reputations crumble, and critics in the media are piling on with brutal commentary. The Indiana Fever, Caitlin Clark's own team, has suddenly found itself at the center of the storm. What should have been a dream partnership, a generational talent paired with a struggling franchise desperate for relevance, has turned into a lightning rod for controversy. Some fans and analysts believe the Fever played a subtle but undeniable role in the chaos, now engulfing the WNBA. Their handling of Clark's minutes, injuries, and public image has fueled speculation that the organization wasn't just negligent, but complicit in allowing her momentum to stall. Critics argue that the Fever's decisions never matched the urgency of Clark's star power. Early in the season, questions were raised about her workload and the physicality of opponents targeting her. Instead of demanding better protection from referees or adjusting game plans, the team seemed content to let Clark absorb the punishment. When her injury finally forced her off the court, it left fans asking, was this preventable? Some even suggest the league and team quietly benefited from Clark being sidelined, as it conveniently shifted attention away from escalating demands in the looming CBA battle. From the outside, this theory sounds like a stretch, but to frustrated fans, the dots connect to a league where the Fever, after all, have been one of the league's most mismanaged franchises for years. Their lack of playoff success and inability to retain stars made Clark their golden ticket. Yet instead of building a strong foundation around her, they've been accused of mishandling her rise. Social media amplified these suspicions, with fans pointing out how little the team seemed to push back when Clark became the target of physical, borderline dirty play from rivals. And here's where it gets even messier. If the Fever really did play along with the league's larger strategy of dampening hype, it would mean sacrificing their own short-term success to protect the owner's long-term agenda. That's the kind of conspiracy that fans love to debate, and it has only added to the WNBA's credibility problem. When viewers begin questioning whether outcomes are being manipulated, trust erodes, and once trust is gone, it's nearly impossible to win back. Meanwhile, Clark's absence exposed the uncomfortable truth that no other player in the league has been able to fill her shoes. The Fever's rivals, from Angel Reese to Aja Wilson, simply don't command the same attention. And when Clark's team stumbled without her, the league lost its centerpiece. Instead of stepping up, other stars were embroiled in their own controversies, fueling the perception that the WNBA doesn't know how to handle success when it arrives. For the Indiana Fever, the fallout has been devastating. Instead of being celebrated as the team that revived the league, they're being accused of undermining it. Whether intentional or not, their role in Clark's setback has left fans feeling betrayed. And that anger only intensified when media critics, from Jason Whitlock to Colin Cowherd, began using the situation as ammunition to tear the league apart even further. When Jason Whitlock weighed in on the WNBA's current state, he did not hold back. Known for his blunt, often controversial takes, Whitlock unleashed a scathing critique that cut deep into the heart of the league's problems. To him, the WNBA wasn't just struggling, it was actively sabotaging itself. In his words, the players had become entitled, unlikable, and completely detached from the reality of how sports actually generate money. This wasn't just a shot at the league's leadership, it was a direct challenge to the players who had been demanding higher pay and more recognition. Whitlock's comments weren't made in a vacuum. He pointed out the contradiction many fans had already noticed. Players loudly campaigned for NBA salaries but failed to consistently draw NBA-level ratings. He argued that Caitlin Clark provided the WNBA with a golden opportunity, and instead of rallying around her star power, the league allowed jealousy and resentment to divide the spotlight. To Whitlock, this wasn't just mismanagement, it was arrogance. He claimed that stars like Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, and others had positioned themselves as victims, constantly demanding "pay us what you owe us" without proving they could sustain the audience Clark brought in. The backlash to Whitlock's rant was immediate and polarizing. Some fans agreed wholeheartedly, praising him for saying what they felt too many were afraid to admit, that the WNBA's growth had little to do with collective effort and everything to do with Clark's once-in-a-generation appeal. Others slammed Whitlock for being dismissive and disrespectful, accusing him of undermining women's sports altogether. But regardless of which side people took, his words spread like wildfire. Clips of his commentary trended online, fueling debates that stretched far beyond the usual WNBA circles. What made his comments sting even more was the timing. With ESPN and Fox already scaling back coverage, Whitlock's voice amplified the perception that the league was unwatchable without Clark. Instead of defending the product, he painted a picture of a toxic environment where players hated one another, fans were alienated, and owners were playing chess with their futures. He even singled out specific stars, blasting Angel Reese for her attitude, mocking veterans like DeWanna Bonner for quitting, and ridiculing Sophie Cunningham for leaning on social media antics instead of basketball performance. Each jab struck a nerve, further fracturing the league's public image. In many ways, Whitlock gave fans an easy narrative. The WNBA had blown its chance. The opportunity to capitalize on Clark's popularity was squandered, not because of a lack of talent, but because of ego, infighting, and misplaced priorities. It wasn't just criticism, it was a verdict. And as painful as it was for players to hear, the narrative resonated with a significant portion of the audience. But if Whitlock's words rattled the WNBA, they were nothing compared to what came next, because another media heavyweight, Colin Cowherd, would deliver an even harsher truth, one that cut to the very core of the league's survival. Colin Cowherd didn't mince words when he addressed the WNBA's freefall. Known for his ability to distill sports into cultural moments, Cowherd framed Caitlin Clark not just as a star, but as the only star who truly mattered to the league. In his eyes, Clark wasn't just another rookie sensation, she was the WNBA's equivalent of Tiger Woods, and the moment she went down, the league's relevance went with her. His message was brutally simple: without Caitlin Clark, the WNBA doesn't exist in the mainstream conversation. Cowherd explained it by pointing to history. Before Tiger Woods, golf was filled with talented players, but television ratings were stagnant. Tiger didn't just elevate the sport, he single-handedly drew audiences that wouldn't have otherwise tuned in. Cowherd argued that Clark had the same effect. Last year, he said he found himself actively seeking out WNBA games, even arranging his schedule around broadcasts. That wasn't because the league suddenly transformed overnight. It was because Clark made it compelling. She gave casual sports fans a reason to care. This season, though, Cowherd admitted the opposite. With Clark sidelined, he hadn't even thought about tuning in. The excitement was gone. He described it as a switch flipping off. Last summer, the WNBA was a headline topic on his show multiple times. This summer, it wasn't even worth mentioning. The takeaway was devastating. If a prominent voice like Cowherd's, who controls hours of daily sports talk, no longer finds the league interesting without Clark, why would networks or casual fans stick around? What made Cowherd's comments so cutting was his acknowledgement that the WNBA does have good players. He mentioned names like Angel Reese and Aja Wilson, but he framed them as supporting characters, not main attractions. Reese could be a counterpunch to Clark, adding to the story but not the centerpiece. Without Clark, Cowherd argued the league lacked the singular draw that makes sports must-watch television. To him, the proof was obvious. He wasn't watching, his audience wasn't asking, and the numbers reflected the same decline. Fans reacted with a mix of anger and resignation. Loyal WNBA supporters called Cowherd dismissive, accusing him of oversimplifying the league's struggles, but many casual fans admitted he was right. They had tuned in for Clark, not the WNBA itself, and once she was gone, so was their interest. That reality cut to the core of the league's dilemma. Building a product dependent on one star was never sustainable, but now the consequences were impossible to ignore. Cowherd's commentary didn't just add fuel to the fire, it confirmed what ESPN and Fox Sports executives were already acting on. If Caitlin Clark was the only thing keeping the WNBA in the national spotlight, then the injury wasn't just a setback, it was a collapse. And with the networks pulling out, the numbers falling, and critics circling, the evidence of that collapse was about to become undeniable. By the time the dust began to settle, the damage was absolutely undeniable. The WNBA's ratings, once celebrated as a sign of a new era, were spiraling downward at a pace few could have predicted. Without Caitlin Clark to keep fans glued to their screens, the league's television numbers plummeted. Games that had been drawing respectable viewership in prime time suddenly dipped to figures that barely registered against reruns and low-tier college matchups. The Clark effect was no longer a buzzword, it was a brutal reality. This collapse extended beyond TV, too. Merchandise sales that spiked during Clark's arrival hit a wall. Jerseys that once sold out in minutes were suddenly sitting on shelves. Ticket sales followed the same pattern. The Fever had packed arenas whenever Clark was on the floor, but with her sidelined, seats emptied out quickly. Teams in other markets felt the ripple effect, realizing that their brief attendance boosts had been tied to the Clark traveling circus, not to their own stars. The harsh truth settled in. The WNBA's sudden boom wasn't sustainable growth, it was a bubble. For players, the frustration was palpable. Many had spent their careers fighting for recognition, insisting the product was good enough to stand on its own. Yet the numbers told a different story. Instead of proving the critics wrong, the post-Clark landscape proved them right. The league without her wasn't drawing mass attention, and the players who had demanded higher pay were suddenly out of leverage. Owners and executives, already preparing for contentious CBA talks, could now point to cold, hard evidence that the demand for WNBA basketball simply wasn't there at the scale players believed. The cultural momentum evaporated just as quickly as it had appeared. Last season, the WNBA was a hot topic on sports talk shows, in podcasts, and across social media. Headlines about rivalries, buzzer beaters, and playoff pushes kept the league in the spotlight. But with Clark absent, those conversations died. Social feeds went quiet, hashtags stopped trending, and debates about player salaries felt hollow. Even celebrity endorsements, the kind of outside attention the league had desperately needed, began to fade. The hype that once felt unstoppable had turned into silence. What made this collapse even more dangerous was the timing. The WNBA had been hoping to leverage its recent momentum into stronger media deals, higher ticket revenues, and expanded sponsorships. Instead, potential partners are now hesitating. Why invest millions in a product whose popularity is tied to the health of one player? Advertisers who had once banked on Clark as a safe bet for visibility are quietly redirecting budgets to other sports with steadier returns. The question hanging over the league is no longer about growth but survival. Without Clark, can the WNBA rebuild enough momentum to prove it belongs in the national spotlight? Or will this ratings freefall mark the beginning of an irreversible decline? Those questions now dominate the conversation, and they lead directly into the heart of the players versus owners battle that could decide the league's fate. As the WNBA heads toward its most uncertain chapter yet, the battle lines are becoming clearer. On one side are the players, frustrated and emboldened, still demanding the respect and compensation they feel they've earned. On the other side are the owners, armed with fresh ammunition in the form of plummeting ratings, dwindling attendance, and network withdrawals. The collision between these two forces is inevitable, and it could decide not just the future of the league, but whether it even has one. The players' argument has always hinged on growth. For years, they insisted the product was gaining traction, that fans were finally paying attention, and that bigger paychecks were justified. Caitlin Clark's rookie year seemed to validate that belief, but now, with Clark sidelined and interest collapsing, the owners are ready to flip the narrative. Why increase salaries when networks don't want the games? Why hand out million-dollar contracts when merchandise sits unsold? To owners, the message is simple. The league doesn't generate enough to support the demands. This dynamic makes the looming CBA talks combustible. A lockout is no longer a distant possibility, it's a looming threat. If players push too hard and owners refuse to budge, the 2026 season could be lost before it even begins. That kind of disruption would devastate a league still struggling to secure its place in the sports landscape. Fans who already drifted away during Clark's absence might never come back, and sponsors wary of instability could permanently walk away. Yet the most troubling part isn't just the financial fight, it's the perception problem. For casual viewers, the WNBA has revealed itself as a one-star league, unable to capture attention without Clark. That perception is deadly. In sports, image matters as much as performance, and right now the league looks fragile, divided, and directionless. Players who should be stepping up as leaders, names like Angel Reese, Aja Wilson, and others have become entangled in controversies that overshadow their talent. Instead of rallying the fan base, they've fueled the perception of dysfunction. For the league's leadership, the path forward is filled with landmines. Do they double down on Clark, building the entire future around her return? Or do they try to spread the spotlight across multiple stars, risking the same lack of traction? Do they push owners to invest in long-term stability, or concede to the reality that the league may not have the financial foundation for the pay scale players want? These are the decisions that will define whether the WNBA survives or collapses under its own contradictions. One thing is certain, the tantrum over ESPN and Fox pulling coverage is just the beginning. The network's retreat exposed cracks that were already there, and now every weakness is on display. The WNBA stands at a crossroads: rebuild around Clark and find a way to stabilize, or watch as years of progress unravel in the span of a single season. The choice will shape the league's destiny, but the clock is already ticking. So, the WNBA's unraveling didn't happen overnight, but Caitlin Clark's injury just brutally exposed how fragile that foundation really was. ESPN and Fox Sports pulling back coverage wasn't simply about one player being sidelined. It was a blunt reminder that without her, the league has genuinely struggled to hold mainstream attention. Ratings collapsed, merchandise slowed, and fans who once filled arenas quietly drifted away. For players pushing for higher pay, the timing couldn't be worse, as owners now hold every single bargaining chip heading into the next CBA fight. Critics like Jason Whitlock and Colin Cowherd only added fuel, framing the WNBA as a league that completely squandered its chance. Now the question isn't whether the league can grow, but honestly, can it even survive? Can Clark's eventual return revive momentum, or has the bubble already burst? The WNBA's next move will decide if this is just a setback, or truly the beginning of the end.